What does a man with nothing do when he gets the chance to save someone who has everything? And what happens when he asks for absolutely nothing in return? At 30,000 feet, high above the world in the quiet of a transcontinental flight, a woman whose net worth was bigger than the GDP of a small country simply stopped breathing. Passengers froze. Flight attendants, though trained for this, felt a cold spike of panic. For a moment that stretched on forever, there was only the hum of the engines and the terrifying stillness of a life about to end. And then, one man moved. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a celebrity. He was just a man from the back of the plane, a man in a worn jacket with tired eyes and hands calloused from work, not privilege. In 2 minutes and 53 seconds, he saved her life. And then, he vanished. This is the story of that man, the billionaire he saved, and the search that would unravel a secret big enough to topple an empire and redeem a soul. The first jolt was violent, a brutal handshake from the sky. Flight 717, a red-eye from New York to San Francisco, dropped 500 feet in a handful of seconds. The cabin erupted in a symphony of shrieks, punctuated by the clatter of dropped phones and plastic cups. Garrett Mitchell's hand shot out, bracing himself on the seat in front while his other arm wrapped protectively around his son, Wyatt, who was fast asleep beside him. The boy, only 8 years old, stirred but didn't wake, wrapped in a blanket of trust so absolute it made Garrett's chest ache. Another shudder racked the plane. The lights flickered, died, then blinked back on, casting a sickly yellow glow on the terrified faces all around. A flight attendant's voice, trembling but firm, crackled over the intercom, telling everyone to stay seated and buckle up. But panic spreads like wildfire, and the flames were already licking at the edges of the cabin. From the opulent bubble of first class, a woman's sharp, commanding voice cut right through the fear. "What is going on? I want to speak to the captain now." That woman was Meredith Carlisle. Even in a crisis, she radiated an aura of total control. Her silver blonde hair was perfect, her silk blouse uncreased, and her diamond earrings caught the flickering emergency lights. As the CEO of Carlisle Aerospace, she was on her way to close a deal that would tack another $1 billion onto her company's value. In her world, people bent to her will. The sky, it seemed, didn't get the memo. Back in row 38, Garrett felt a different kind of anxiety. His was a quiet, gnawing dread that had nothing to do with the turbulence. In his pocket was a crumpled last-minute ticket to Phoenix, with a connection in San Francisco that was already razor thin. And in a hospital bed in Phoenix, his mother, Lorraine, was breathing with the help of a machine. He had 4 hours. 4 hours to cross a continent and say goodbye to the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. He couldn't be late. He just couldn't. The plane bucked again, and this time a scream came from the front. The chaos in the sky was about to get deeply, terrifyingly personal. Garrett Mitchell was a ghost of the man he used to be. 6 years ago, he'd been a senior aerospace engineer. He spoke the language of physics and thrust and saw the world in elegant equations of lift and drag. He had a brilliant wife, Brooke, a fellow engineer whose laugh was the soundtrack to his life, and a 3-year-old son, Wyatt, who had her bright, curious eyes. Their life was sketched out in perfect lines, a future that seemed as solid as the alloys he worked with. Then, in an instant, it all went up in smoke. A test flight, a catastrophic failure in a hydraulic control system, a system he had flagged, a flaw he had warned his supervisors about in meticulously detailed reports. The explosion over the Nevada desert didn't just steal his wife, it shattered his world. The official report was a masterpiece of corporate deflection, hiding names and burying blame in technical jargon. Garrett lost his wife, and as whispers and blame settled on his shoulders during the investigation, he lost his career. The industry that had been his passion slammed its doors in his face. He was left with a hollowed-out heart and a little boy who needed a father. So he adapted. He buried the engineer and became whatever he needed to be. He retrained as a nurse, a job where empathy mattered more than equations. But the late-night shifts and meager paychecks were a constant grinding struggle. Eventually, he left that too, taking on odd jobs, anything to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Their life became a patchwork of just enoughs and not quites. Garrett's sneakers were a size too small, held together with duct tape. Dinner was often just pasta with butter, a meal Garrett would serve with a smile, telling Wyatt it was an Italian specialty. This flight was the climax of their struggle. He had $47 in his wallet, a half-eaten granola bar they'd shared, and a crushing deadline. His mother, Lorraine, had sold her car years ago to help pay for his engineering degree. She'd worked double shifts as a diner waitress, her hands always smelling of coffee and bleach, all so her son could reach for the sky. Now her lungs were failing, and Garrett was racing against the clock, praying he wouldn't have to say his last goodbye over the phone. Up in seat 1A, Meredith Carlisle's world was the exact opposite of Garrett's. Her problems were abstract, measured in stock points and market share. She was on the phone, her voice a clipped Arctic blade, dismantling a subordinate over a missed deadline. "I don't pay for excuses, I pay for results. Fix it, or I'll find someone who can." She ended the call without a goodbye, jabbing the screen with her thumb. She was a woman who built an empire on one ruthless principle: weakness is a liability. People were just components in a complex machine, replaceable if they failed. She glanced around the cabin, annoyed. The fear of the other passengers was just an inconvenience, a delay. She was untouchable, insulated by so many layers of wealth and power she'd forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable. She hadn't yet learned that at 30,000 feet, everyone is made of the same fragile flesh and bone. The plane didn't just shudder, it convulsed. A horrifying groan of stressed metal echoed through the cabin as it plunged again, this time with a sickening sideways yaw. Overhead compartments burst open, spilling bags and coats into the aisle. Panic tipped into pandemonium. A man in the row ahead of Garrett was hyperventilating, his eyes wide with terror. But amidst the screaming, Garrett's mind, the engineer's mind he had tried so hard to bury, snapped into focus. He heard a distinct high-pitched whistle coming from a panel near the exit road line. He saw the cabin wall seem to flex in a way it never should, the training he'd left behind rushing back. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "Garrett, stay right here, don't move, I'll be right back," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm. He squeezed his son's shoulder, a silent promise. He moved into the aisle, bracing himself against the plane's violent lurches. A flight attendant was struggling to secure a rattling service cart, her face pale. "There's a pressure issue," Garrett said, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through her fear. "That panel near the exit row, the seal might be compromised." He didn't wait for permission. He moved toward the exit row, where a piece of the interior wall had come loose, flapping with the pressure changes. It was a minor structural problem, but to everyone else, it looked like the plane was coming apart. "It's just a cosmetic panel," Garrett announced to the terrified passengers nearby, his voice projecting a confidence he didn't really feel. He grabbed the loose edge and, with a grunt, wedged it back into place. The whistling stopped. The visual threat was gone. A small pocket of calm formed around him. It was in that brief, deceptive quiet that the real crisis struck. A choked gasp came from first class. It wasn't a scream of fear, but the awful sound of a body betraying itself. Meredith Carlisle, who had been gripping her armrests, suddenly went limp. Her head slumped to the side, her perfectly made-up face turning a deathly shade of gray. Her chest was still. She wasn't breathing. "She's collapsed!" someone yelled. A flight attendant rushed forward. Ma'am, can you hear me?" She shook Meredith's shoulder. Nothing. The attendant's training kicked in, but her hands were trembling. "Is there a doctor on board? We have a medical emergency." Silence. Just 53 passengers, frozen in their seats, a captive audience to a life slipping away. They were bankers and lawyers, tech bros and tourists, but none of them were doctors. Garrett felt a magnetic pull. His two worlds collided. The race to his dying mother fought with the dying woman in front of him. Getting involved meant delays. It meant drawing attention, something he'd avoided for 6 long years. He looked back at Wyatt, his small face a pale oval in the dim light. What kind of man would he be if he just walked away? What would that teach the one person who mattered most? He moved. He pushed through the narrow aisle, past the stunned faces. "I'm a former nurse," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "Let me through." He knelt in the cramped space beside seat 1A. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fear. He placed 2 fingers on Meredith's neck. No pulse. Her skin was clammy, her lips tinged with blue. "She's in cardiac arrest. We need to start CPR, now. Someone get the AED. He didn't wait. He tilted her head back, cleared her airway, and placed the heel of his hand on her sternum, locking the fingers of his other hand over top, and he began to push. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. His voice was a steady rhythm in the chaotic cabin. The world narrowed to just his hands and her chest. He wasn't Garrett, the grieving son, or Garrett, the failed engineer. He was a machine, focused on one task. The rhythm was brutal, a violent dance of life and death. He could feel the cartilage in her ribs groaning under the pressure. 28, 29, 30. He gave 2 rescue breaths, trying to spark her life with his own. Then he was back on her chest, counting. A flight attendant arrived with the defibrillator, tearing open the package. Garrett ripped open Meredith's silk blouse to expose her chest, his movements efficient, without hesitation. He stuck the pads on as the machine's robotic voice began its analysis. Analyzing heart rhythm. Do not touch the patient. The plane felt strangely silent. Every eye was on that little box. Shock advised. Charging. Stand clear. Garrett pulled his hands away, his own heart pounding. Everybody clear, he yelled. The machine sent the jolt. Meredith's body arched violently off the seat, then fell back. Garrett's fingers were instantly on her neck, searching. Nothing. No pulse. Resuming CPR, he stated, and immediately went back to compressions. His shoulders burned. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the plush carpet, but he didn't stop. He was fighting, not just for this stranger, but against the ghost of all the loss he'd already endured. He would not let another life slip away on his watch. He finished another cycle, then another. 2 minutes and 53 seconds had passed. It felt like a lifetime. Just as he was about to give another breath, Meredith's body gave a convulsive shudder. A deep, ragged cough tore from her lungs. Her eyelids fluttered. Color flooded her face, faint at first, then a rush of pink. She was breathing. It was shallow and erratic, but she was breathing. A collective sigh of relief washed through the cabin, so palpable it was almost a sound. Garrett sat back on his heels, his body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. He had done it. He had pulled her from the brink. The captain's voice, now a beacon of calm, announced they were diverting to Denver for the medical emergency. As the plane descended, paramedics were already waiting on the tarmac. The moment the doors opened, a team of professionals swarmed the first-class cabin, their movements practiced and swift. They surrounded Meredith, hooking her up to monitors and securing her to a stretcher.
In the controlled chaos, Garrett Mitchell became invisible again. The spotlight had moved on, and he was once more just a man in a cheap seat. He stood up, his knees aching, and made his way back to row 38. Wyatt was awake, his eyes wide. "Is the lady okay, Dad?" "She's going to be okay, buddy," Garrett said, his voice hoarse. He sank into his seat as the adrenaline drained away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the renewed, stabbing urgency of his own journey. His mother. The clock was ticking, louder than ever. A flight attendant, the one whose trembling hands he had steadied, rushed over. "Sir, thank you. That was incredible. The airline will want to... We need your name, your contact information." Garrett looked at her, then at the bustling scene up front. He saw the paramedics lifting the stretcher. He saw the dazed, conscious face of the woman he had just saved. He saw a world of complications, of news reports and questions he didn't want to answer. A world that would drag him back into a past he had fought for 6 years to escape. All he wanted was to get to Phoenix. "It's fine," he mumbled, grabbing their single, worn backpack from under the seat. I have a connecting flight to catch." The unfairness of it all was a bitter taste in his mouth. Doing the right thing had probably cost him his last chance to say goodbye. Before she could protest, he took Wyatt's hand. "Come on, kiddo, we've got to run." They blended into the stream of deplaning passengers, just 2 anonymous figures in a crowd. No one gave them a second look. They were just a tired father and his son. He didn't look back. He melted into the sterile anonymity of the Denver airport, found the departures board, and saw with a sinking heart that his connection to Phoenix was already boarding at a gate on the complete opposite side of the airport. He started to run, pulling Wyatt along, a hero without a name, a ghost who had walked through a storm, held a life in his hands, and then simply walked away, driven not by a desire for recognition, but by the desperate primal need to get home. Meredith Carlisle woke to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the sterile scent of a hospital. For a moment, she had no idea where she was. Her last memory was a crushing weight on her chest, the world fading to black. She tried to sit up and groaned. "Take it easy, Miss Carlisle. You're at Denver General. You had a cardiac event on the flight." A doctor with a kind, weary face stood by her bed, looking at her chart. Meredith's mind, which was usually a fortress of clarity, was a fog. But one image was crystal clear. A man's face, intense and focused, his hands on her chest, eyes that were tired but held an incredible, steely resolve. "The man," she whispered, her throat raw. "On the plane. The one who... he saved me." The doctor nodded. "The paramedics said a passenger performed CPR until they arrived. He saved your life, no question." "Who was he? I need to see him. I need to thank him," she said. It wasn't a request, it was an order, her default setting. Her chief of security, a humorless man named Hansen who had already flown in on the company jet, stepped forward. "We're working on it, Miss Carlisle. The airline is pulling the passenger manifest." But it wasn't that simple. An hour later, Hansen came back, frustrated. "We have a problem. The flight attendants were busy. No one got a good ID. There were 3 men named Mitchell on the flight. 2 are accounted for and say they weren't involved. The third, a G. Mitchell in seat 38B, seems to have vanished. He paid cash for a last-minute ticket, the contact number goes to a burner phone, and there's no frequent flyer info. He's a ghost." Meredith stared at him, incredulous. In her world, everyone had a digital footprint. A ghost? "Impossible," she said. "Find him. Use every resource we have. I don't care what it costs. Find the man from row 38. Over the next few days, as her body recovered, her mind fixated on the man who had brought her back. She, who had always seen people as assets or liabilities, was consumed by the idea of someone who would do something so significant and then just walk away, wanting nothing. It was a concept so alien to her worldview it shook her to her core. Her multi-billion-dollar empire, her board meetings, her stock prices, it all seemed like a meaningless game compared to the raw humanity of what had happened on that plane. She hired a team of private investigators, the best in the world. They interviewed every passenger. The descriptions were vague, contradictory. He was tall. He was average height. He looked poor. He looked like he used to be someone. He had a kid with him. He had sad eyes. Meredith spent hours watching the blurry cell phone videos that had popped up online. In the chaos, she would catch glimpses of him, a flash of a worn jacket, a steady hand on her chest. In one clip, she could just make him out in the background, heading down the jet bridge, a small boy in tow. His face was turned away. Lying in her private hospital room, she felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion. Humility. Her life hadn't been saved by her wealth or her status, but by a complete stranger, a man the world would dismiss as a nobody. He had held her life in his hands and then disappeared. Meredith Carlisle made a vow. She would find this man. It wasn't just about gratitude anymore. It was a pilgrimage. She needed to understand him, to understand a world where an act of grace could be its own reward. It became the most important acquisition of her life, and she would move heaven and earth to make it happen. Weeks turned into a month. Meredith's elite team of investigators was hitting a wall. The ghost of G. Mitchell was proving impossible to find. All they had was a vague description, a sun, and a trail that went cold at the Denver airport. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A young analyst on the team decided to ignore the name and focus on the action. He cross-referenced facial recognition software against the blurry flight videos with old employee databases of major aerospace and medical corporations. A long shot, but witnesses had said the man seemed to have some kind of technical or medical knowledge. For days, the algorithm churned through millions of faces, and then it got a hit. A low-confidence match, but a match. The image was from an old corporate ID badge, dated 7 years ago. The name read Garrett Mitchell, Senior Aerospace Engineer, Hale Dynamics.
The face in the photo was younger, the eyes brighter, but there was no mistaking it. It was him. The investigators descended on the new lead. They pulled public records, employment histories, everything. And the story that emerged was a tragedy. They uncovered the records of Hale Dynamics, a company known for its cutting-edge and often risky projects. They found news archives detailing a test flight crash over the Nevada desert 6 years ago. Then came the bombshell. As Meredith's lead investigator briefed her over a secure video link, his voice was grave. "Miss Carlisle, Hale Dynamics was acquired by Carlisle Aerospace 4 years ago. It's one of your subsidiaries now, operating under the name Carlisle Advanced Systems." Meredith felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Go on." "The engineer, Garrett Mitchell, he was the lead on the flight control systems for that prototype. According to internal memos we found, he repeatedly flagged a potential failure point in a hydraulic manifold. He formally recommended grounding the test fleet. He was overruled by his supervisor." The investigator paused. 3 months later, that exact system failed. The aircraft disintegrated. The official report blamed pilot error and unforeseeable atmospheric conditions. Mitchell was scapegoated internally and pushed out of the industry. Meredith's hands trembled. Was there a fatality?" "One," the investigator said softly. "A civilian observer. Her name was redacted in the public report for privacy, but we pulled the sealed file. The observer was Brooke Mitchell, his wife." The room fell silent. The beep of the heart monitor in her memory was replaced by a deafening roar in her ears. The man who saved her life was the man whose life her company had destroyed. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a reckoning. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The sad eyes, the retreat from the world, the vanishing act. He hadn't just been running to his dying mother. He had been running from her, from the name Carlisle, a name that must have been a curse in his world. She had been saved by the man she, however unknowingly, had helped to break. The knowledge was a physical weight, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs all over again. Her search for a hero had led her to a victim, her victim, and she now understood that a simple thank you would be the gravest insult of all. Finding him after that was easy. Investigators traced the property records for his late mother in Phoenix, which led to the sale of her home and a deed transfer for a small, isolated cabin on the shores of Lake Tahoe, a place that had been in Brooke's family for generations. It was a place to hide. She didn't send her team. She didn't send Hanson. She went herself. She flew to Reno, rented a normal sedan, and drove the winding mountain roads alone. The opulence of her life felt like a costume she was desperate to take off. The cabin was small, weathered gray by the sun and snow. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. She saw a little boy, Wyatt, throwing a stick for a scruffy dog near the water's edge. Her heart ached. This was the life she had broken. She walked up the simple wooden steps and knocked. Garrett opened the door. He looked older than he had on the plane, the lines around his eyes deeper. He was holding a cup of coffee, and when he saw her, the cup froze. Recognition dawned, followed by a flicker of something she couldn't name. Not anger, not fear, but a profound, soul-deep weariness. "Miss Carlisle," he said. It wasn't a question. "Mr. Mitchell," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper. May I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. The cabin was sparse but clean. Books on engineering and physics were stacked on a pine shelf, a life he couldn't quite leave behind. "I came to thank you," she began, the words feeling hollow and absurd. "You saved my life." He just looked at her, his gaze steady. "I'm glad you're okay." "I want to reward you," she pushed on, falling back on the only language she knew. "Anything you want. A house, a trust for your son, a job, just name it." He finally looked away, staring out the window at his son playing by the lake. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 6 years of pain. "Can you give me my wife back, Miss Carlisle? Can your money do that?" The question hung in the air like a shard of glass. "I know about the accident," she said, her voice cracking. I know about Brooke. I didn't know until I searched for you. My company, I am so sorry. Garrett let out a short, bitter laugh. Sorry. The supervisor who buried my reports was sorry. The board that signed off on the investigation was sorry. Sorry is the word people use when the cost of being right is too high. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time she saw not just weariness, but a flicker of the brilliant, passionate man he must have been. I don't want your money. I don't want your job. Your money is stained with the lies that killed my wife. Your company is the one that did it. What I wanted years ago was for someone to listen, for someone to value a human life more than a launch date. But that's not how your world works, is it? He stood there, a man with nothing, having just refused a fortune. In that moment, he stripped away all of Meredith's power, leaving her with nothing but the ugly truth. She had come to reward a hero and was instead being judged by her victim. And she knew, with devastating certainty, that he was right. What is true justice worth? Meredith Carlisle had the power to give Garrett Mitchell anything except the one thing that mattered. So what does she do next with a choice that could change everything? Stick around as we get to the conclusion of this incredible story. Meredith left the cabin that day a different woman. Garrett's rejection of her wealth, his quiet demand for accountability had shattered her world. A blank check was the easy way out. Justice was hard. It was costly. It was real. She flew back to her headquarters and did the unthinkable. She didn't bury the truth. She dug it up. She bypassed her board, ignored her lawyer's frantic advice, and used her power as CEO to publicly reopen the investigation into the Hale Dynamics disaster. It was a corporate earthquake. She released Garrett's original, unheeded reports. She fired the executives involved in the cover-up. The story was explosive, a stunning admission of guilt from the very top. Carlisle Aerospace stock plummeted, lawsuits mounted, the media went into a frenzy. Her board tried to oust her, but she held firm. But amidst the financial wreckage, something else happened. Garrett Mitchell's name was cleared. He was no longer a scapegoat, but a tragic hero who had tried to prevent the disaster that took his wife. Meredith wasn't finished. 2 months later, she held a press conference. She announced the creation of the Brooke Mitchell Foundation for Aerospace Safety and Ethical Engineering, an independent organization endowed with $1 billion of her own personal fortune. Its mission was simple: fund research into safety systems, fund grants for ethical whistleblowers, and fight to make sure profit never comes before human life. And then she announced its new director. She hadn't called Garrett to offer him the job. She flew back to Lake Tahoe, this time with a single document, the foundation's charter. She didn't offer him a job, she offered him a purpose. I can't fix what was broken, but maybe you can. Maybe you can use this to make sure no one else goes through what you did. You can build the legacy Brooke deserved. This time, Garrett didn't say no. He saw not charity, but a chance for restitution, a chance to turn his pain into a shield for others. Our final scene isn't one of lavish wealth. It's a year later. Garrett stands at a podium in a new, state-of-the-art safety lab, dedicating it in his wife's name. He's wearing a simple suit. He looks whole. His voice is steady as he talks about integrity and courage. In the front row, Wyatt, now 9, watches his father with pride. He's finally wearing new sneakers. Further back, away from the cameras, sits Meredith Carlisle. She's no longer the CEO. She stepped down to chair the foundation. Her hair is a simple, unadorned silver. She watches Garrett, not as a billionaire benefactor, but as a grateful woman who was saved in more ways than one. He saved her life in the sky, but he saved her soul on the ground.